I'm Lilia Luciano. I'm an investigative reporter here at ABC 10. Many of you know my stories. This week I've been covering a story that, of course, as some of you know, is very dear to my heart because it's about my homeland, Puerto Rico, which has been going through tremendous turmoil, not just for the past 2 weeks while protesters have been manifesting against the governor, but also for a very long time when it comes to issues of corruption. Especially, and the thing that has made this moment in Puerto Rico's history so important is that the corruption that's been discovered, that's under investigation, is something that was taking place during the most vulnerable time in Puerto Rico's history, and that is during Hurricane Maria. While we're going through recovery efforts for Maria, while Puerto Rico is going through that, now it's coming to light that there were mismanagement of funds for education, for healthcare, and now there's questions about even the supplies that were being gathered and were not being distributed. Today we're learning that FEMA is changing is changing the date in which and the process by which they would disperse funds for Puerto Rico. I know that a lot of people have questions about, what happened to aid, and I know that the president has made a lot of comments about that. Up until now, the center of these scandals of corruption has not been funds that were geared towards Maria. But still, right now FEMA is not very confident in terms of the leadership in Puerto Rico. Of course, we're going through a transition, and so they're announcing that they are reverting the process of dispersing aid that's coming to Puerto Rico. That is of great concern. That is the kind of impact that corruption has. Right now, what Puerto Ricans are celebrating by the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, not just in the island, but outside of the island, is the announcement that Ricardo Rosselló, or Ricky Rosselló, as many know him, is in effect resigning, effective on August 2nd, so next Friday, a week from tomorrow. A lot of people have questions about what's going to happen after that. I just did a story at the 5 p.m. newscast, and so I wanted to ask you to send me your questions. Tell me what curiosities you have, what you don't understand, and I'm here to answer some of those questions based on my reporting in Puerto Rico. I'm hoping that I can see the questions. If you can send me some or something to make sure that it's going to appear on my screen, I'd really appreciate it. In the meantime, let's tell you about what happened yesterday. So yesterday, after about 2 weeks of protests, ongoing protests with hundreds of thousands of people going out to the streets and striking and declaring a national strike twice in the island, among other protests that were happening every day, finally, after 8 hours of waiting from the moment that the governor's team announced that the governor was in fact going to send a message to the people of Puerto Rico, after 8 hours of waiting, after journalists were gathered at the governor's mansion just waiting for a message, waiting for some kind of sign that he would resign, he finally submitted a message via the Fortaleza, which is the governor's mansion, within their Facebook page. In the message, he went through all of his, praised all of his successes or efforts throughout his governorship, and then in the end he said he is leaving, he is resigning, in fact, effective next Friday. So I have a question from Nina Serna. She's asking, is he going to be allowed to leave without repercussions? Well, resigning is for sure repercussion. The governor hasn't been indicted himself for crimes, but he is under investigation in the sense that everyone who took part in this chat, the famous Telegram chat that everybody's been talking about, where there were messages that were considered misogynistic and homophobic and offensive and cruel, that chat is under investigation. The Department of Justice in the island has issued search warrants to everybody who was involved in that chat. So they're gathering those phones. There's been criticism because that measure took too long. And the person in charge of that department is Wanda Vasquez. Wanda Vasquez is the third in line to assume the governorship. So once Ricky resigns, The position is supposed to go to the second person in line, which would be the state secretary. That position is empty at the moment because the person who occupied it resigned out of the same scandal. So the third in line is the Department of Justice secretary. She has been criticized for dragging her feet on investigating not just the chat scandal, but other issues and other problems that could potentially be of criminal nature around the Rosselló administration. So repercussions, and let's step back for a second, if in fact they find crimes committed within the contents of this chat, and as of now, both the Attorneys Association in Puerto Rico and the panel of attorneys that was assigned by the legislature to study the chat and determine whether something illegal was happening there came up with the same conclusion, which is there are crimes, or there are at least grounds for impeachment. This happened yesterday when the panel of attorneys that was assigned to evaluate this chat and come up with a conclusion and advise the legislature about whether or not there were grounds for impeachment, meaning, are there crimes being committed? Is there something potentially criminal being done? These attorneys all concluded, yes, in fact, there's something, at least five violations, if not four. I'm sorry, 4 of them being serious were committed within the chat, according to these attorneys. So we don't know what is in store for Ricardo Rosselló other than stepping down. Of course, he could change his mind within the next week. One of the things that people are expecting is that he will, in fact, appoint a Secretary of State to follow him so that governorship wouldn't go to Wanda Vasquez, who has a lot of skeletons in the closet and is under scrutiny by the people of Puerto Rico and has been criticized for her lack of action, her inaction, and some of her actions while in positions of power. Please send me more questions. I'm still answering Nina's question about what will happen, what repercussions are in store for Ricardo Rosselló. If he committed crimes, well, then whatever would have been found out through the impeachment process is going to be found out in federal investigations. And of course, the FBI is in Puerto Rico. They are investigating. They've already arrested his Secretary of Education and the person who was the executive director of the healthcare administration in Puerto Rico. So there would be repercussions if, in fact, he himself broke the law. The reasons why people were sick and tired of this administration and of Ricardo Rosselló is because of all of those other crimes that have come to light from people who have been assigned or appointed by him. How long will it take before they are arrested? Who knows? Right now, 2 members of his cabinet top members of his cabinet have been arrested. Between 20 and 30 people who led agencies or departments in Puerto Rico are under investigation or have resigned from their posts in the middle of all these scandals. There's one figure that's really important here, and he's a lobbyist, and we haven't delved too much into his case, but he certainly is under investigation by federal authorities. And this is kind of the person who has been described as the architect of this entire scheme of corruption, which involved private sector, public funds, and a lot of the people who are deeply being scrutinized right now. Thank you for your question, Mary. So, yeah, I mean, Ricardo Rosselló has not been indicted. He hasn't been charged with a crime. His administration is under investigation. But, one of the things that a lot of people talked about and wondered and questioned was, is this whole thing, are hundreds of thousands of Puerto Ricans out in the streets over some offensive chats? I mean, isn't there a First Amendment? Well, it's not about the chats. It's not about the offensive comments in the chats. It's about potential violations of laws that may have taken place, and attorneys have agreed now that are likely to have taken place within that chat. Another thing of concern is not everybody in the chat was a government official. Some were not. So they were sharing information and documents that these people who were not government officials were not supposed to be privy to. And that's important. And then you have to look at the context and the historical, social, economic context of Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has been forever, for all of its modern history since the Spaniards got to the island, has been a colony by every definition. Puerto Rico has been a colony of Spain and then became a colony of the United States. Right now, Puerto Ricans, as many of you might know, can't vote in general elections. Puerto Ricans don't have representation in Congress. We have one resident commissioner who's not really a voice or a vote in Congress. She's basically lobbying for the interests of Puerto Rico with other members of Congress who do have the power. The fate of Puerto Rico, it does lie in the hands of Congress, and basically Congress has the last word when it comes to what happens to Puerto Rico as a territory of the United States. So there are issues of self-determination. There are issues of special interests that have come in and taken what the people consider is theirs. There, of course, was the hurricane. There have been corporations who have experimented and exploited the natural resources, the health of the Puerto Rican people. There have been military practices that have been truly detrimental in Puerto Rico. And so you have a people who have historically felt like we don't have the power over what happens to us. And then for the first time, there's this, basically what's being called this revolution. And it does away with the thing that Puerto Ricans can control, which is at least the local government of the people who they have elected to lead and have been defrauding or have been at least disappointing the people of Puerto Rico. So that's what's going on. I'm gonna post in a few minutes another debrief with a little bit of that context for you to understand, where these protests began. Many of you might have seen artists like Ricky Martin and Bad Bunny out there leading these marches, these protests, and it's really interesting the role that artists play in the Puerto Rican culture. Artists are really the ones that carry the name of Puerto Rico to all corners of the world. Puerto Rico's been known to have very famous musicians and athletes. And so with that comes a kind of responsibility to be the voice and the eyes of Puerto Ricans outside of the island. And so it's been really special to see people like Residente, Ricky Martin, Bad Bunny, J Balvin, Nicky Jam. I always confuse those two. J Balvin's Colombian. Nicky Jam, rappers, urban artists, but also even J-Lo putting messages out there. People who are either born in the island or Puerto Rican by their parents, second, third generation Puerto Ricans, taking this message elsewhere and saying, hey, this matters. And so this is a really special moment in the history of the island, because it's a moment where especially the younger generations are saying, we're not going to be skeptical, we're not going to sit back and assume that we don't matter, that our voice doesn't matter. We're going to take matters into our own hands. And Puerto Rico has a two-party system, just like the U.S. There's a third party, which is the party that advocates for independence of Puerto Rico. It's usually a much smaller coalition. During the last election, where Ricky Rosselló won the election as governor, there were several independent candidates who received a pretty high margin, a pretty high tally of votes, which is very unusual. There's one candidate in particular who ran as an independent and got 12% of the vote. Puerto Rico has a very high voter turnout, so that's a lot of people, 12%. So a lot of what's being talked about now is that perhaps this is the crumbling of the old two-party system in the island, and that people are going to be looking for something different in terms of leadership, something that's not who your parents' party is, or something that is exclusively about whether you're voting for the pro-statehood, the pro-independence, or the pro-Commonwealth party. David says, hopefully Puerto Rico will have better leadership when the governor leaves next week. Certainly. Certainly, but there's cause for concern. There's people wondering, well, if the governorship goes to the person that's next in line, there's not a whole lot of trust. And I'm hearing from people in Puerto Rico right now who are saying, hey, we're ready to go back out there. This is not about removing one person. This is about, destroying this system, and the system that has shielded and aided and abated corruption, and has taken public funds that are meant for the biggest needs of the people, and just funneled them through contracts to to peers and friends and a small group of people in power. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, David, definitely, hopefully there's going to be better leadership. Another thing that that comes to mind thinking about what happened yesterday is when I was a little girl, and throughout most of my childhood, the governor that I remember through most of my childhood for 8 years was Pedro Rosselló. That's Ricardo Rosselló's father. And I still remember, even being a child, I still remember clearly how many corruption scandals that administration was dragging. Dozens of top members of his cabinet and associates of his ended up in prison, were charged with federal corruption charges, ended up serving time in prison. So now you're talking about, someone who is the son of this person who left office in the middle of this legacy of corruption. Puerto Rico gives them a second chance, and this is what happens. People are saying, enough of that. Nina's asking, are there any candidates that Puerto Ricans trust? Well, I can't speak for all of Puerto Ricans, but I have heard a lot of comments pertaining to how they don't trust the major figures and the old school figures of the two main parties, the Partido Popular Democrático, or Democratic Popular Party, or the Partido Nuevo Progresista, New Progressive Party. The New Progressive Party is the statehood party. That is Rosselló's party, pro-statehood. That is the right of center party. And then you have the Popular Democratic Party, Partido Popular Democrático, PPD, which is the party that advocates for the Constitution of Puerto Rico remaining as it is for the Commonwealth. That party is center to center right. To center left. Way towards the left, you have the Independence Party. What people are saying is, we do not trust these two parties, not the Reds nor the Blues, not the Commonwealth Party, neither the Commonwealth Party nor the Statehood Party, who have been in power for so long, and both have had a history of corruption and exploitation and special interests and influence peddling. So you have to look at not one candidate in particular right now that has emerged, although in the last election there were independent candidates who are still being talked about as people who have integrity. But moving forward, what's going to happen to those parties? And what's really going to be interesting in 2020, looking at the elections in Puerto Rico, is in the past, you had independent candidates, or candidates who were running independently, who you would think, and what ended up happening and why Rosselló won is because of these independent, or these candidates running independently. Well, they were taking away votes from either or that's the logic. It's like, oh, well, then, you take away votes from one of the two, and then whoever has the majority wins, costing the votes to the other. Whatever the political theory is there, I'm not going to make calculations, but what's going to be interesting is to see whether in 2020, anybody who aligns with the two major parties in Puerto Rico, the equivalent to the Democrats and the equivalent to the Republicans, is that going to be something that's detrimental to these candidates, especially among the younger generations, because there is no trust in this traditional two-party system. Please send me more questions. I'm here. I'll be connected. My Facebook page is I'm sure within the description of this Facebook Live, and I'm always up for talking about Puerto Rico. So I'm going to disconnect from the Facebook Live, but I'm happy to answer all of your questions, and stay tuned for this debrief. If you want to share it with your friends who don't really understand what's happening in Puerto Rico and are trying to tune into the local media but don't speak Spanish, please do share. God bless Puerto Rico. Yes, Linda, for sure. We appreciate that. Thank you for joining, and it's definitely a big party over there. So it's a good place to go on vacation right now and forever because it's really paradise. Thank you. Have a good night, guys.